Shark turned at the reef gap the way something confident turns at a doorway, without slowing, without asking permission, and with the quiet certainty that the space belonged to it as much as it belonged to anyone. The reef lay a mile offshore, a long broken line of coral heads and rock shelves that turned deep blue ocean into a patchwork of turquoise, jade, and dark ink. From the beach it looked like a pale seam under the water, a place where waves stood up and broke in white lines. Boats used the reef the way drivers used guardrails, as a reference point, a boundary that told you where not to go. There were two safe entries into the lagoon side. One was wide and shallow but only passable at high tide. The other was the reef gap, narrow, deeper, and always moving, because the ocean insisted on pushing through any opening it could find. The locals called it the cut. Tour operators called it the channel because that sounded safer. It wasn't unsafe if you treated it like what it was, a living funnel. Every morning, Leila Santos ran the buoy line. She did it before the first snorkel boat arrived and before the beach filled with people who thought the sea was a swimming pool. The buoys marked the safe corridor for swimmers on the lagoon side, and they marked the boundary that boats were supposed to respect. They were simple, bright orange floats tied to a rope line anchored at 2 points. In calm weather they sat obediently in a gentle arc. In swell, they bobbed and pulled like impatient dogs. Leila's job title was Marine Safety, but in reality she was part lifeguard, part mechanic, part translator between humans and water. She worked for the small resort on the south end of the bay, the kind of place that promised authentic island calm, while running a generator behind the kitchen and importing half its food by barge. She liked the early hours because the ocean was honest then. It hadn't yet been churned by 100 fins and kicking feet. You could see the reef from the surface like a map. You could hear small things, parrotfish crunching coral, the soft slap of a turtle's flipper, the wind shifting in palm fronds along shore. This morning, when Leila motored out in the skiff, the buoys looked wrong from a distance. Not broken, not missing. Wrong. The line that should have curved smoothly along the lagoon edge was stretched out and skewed. The floats pulled closer to the reef gap like someone had grabbed the rope and dragged it sideways. The last buoy, the one nearest the cut, was almost in the channel, bobbing in darker water where the current ran stronger. Leila narrowed her eyes. "Come on," she muttered, and opened the throttle a little. The skiff bounced lightly over small swell. She cut the engine near the buoy line and let the boat drift while she hooked the rope with a gaff. The rope was taut. Too taut. That was the first clue. A buoy line didn't go tight like that unless the anchors had shifted or the current was pulling harder than usual. She leaned over, grabbed the rope with both hands, and hauled it up enough to inspect the knot. It was intact. The rope was good. No fraying, no obvious break. So why the drift? Leila looked toward the reef gap. The cut was alive this morning. Water poured through it from outside the reef, a steady river of ocean squeezing into the calmer lagoon. You could see the current by the way the surface wrinkled and by the way foam streaks moved faster there than anywhere else. That current was normal, but the buoy line had been set far enough away that it shouldn't be getting dragged in, unless one anchor had walked. Leila pulled the rope hand over hand and felt the strain travel up her arms. She followed it to where the second-to-last buoy dipped lower than the others, tugged by something beneath. She held her breath and peered down into the water. The lagoon was clear enough to see 15 feet down. Sunlight turned the sand into a pale sheet. Coral heads cast dark shadows. And there, near the anchor block, she saw it. Not the anchor itself, but the path it had carved. A faint trench in the sand, a dragged line as if a heavy object had been pulled a meter or two toward the cut. Leila swore softly. The anchor block had shifted. The line was being slowly walked by current, every surge nudging it closer to the channel. She had to reset it. She tied the skiff off to the buoy line, slipped on a mask, and dropped into the water. The first shock of cool wrapped around her, then eased. She kicked down toward the anchor, equalizing, eyes scanning. The block came into view. A concrete lump half buried in sand with the rope tied to a metal ring. It had moved, just like she thought. Layla grabbed the block and tried to haul it back. It didn't budge. Sand suction held it, and the current, even at depth, tugged at the rope like a persistent hand. She rested for a moment, hovering, and looked around to judge the safest way to dig it free and reposition it. That was when she saw the shark. At first it was only a shape in the blue beyond the reef gap, darker than the water, smooth, purposeful. It moved along the edge of the current line like it was following a road, not darting, not circling playfully, just cruising with the calm efficiency of something that didn't waste energy. Layla's pulse kicked up, quick and involuntary. The shark wasn't huge, but it was big enough that her mind registered it as serious. Perhaps 6 or 7 feet, a clean torpedo form. She couldn't tell the species immediately from this angle. Reef sharks and other coastal species pass through here sometimes. Most were not interested in humans, especially not a single diver in shallow water. But most wasn't a guarantee, and the reef gap was a hunting funnel. Fish moved through it, predators followed. Layla stayed still, controlling her breathing through the snorkel. The shark approached the cut, angling toward the gap where the current ran strongest. Then, right at the entrance, right at the point where the water accelerated and the reef walls tightened, the shark turned. It didn't turn away in fear. It turned with purpose, like it had reached a decision point and chosen the lagoon side instead of pushing through to open ocean. Its tail swept once, powerful, and it glided along the inside edge of the reef, parallel to the buoy line. Layla felt a cold clarity settle in her chest. If the shark was using the gap as a turn point, it meant the gap was part of its route. A routine, a patrol. And the buoy line, dragged wrong toward the cut, was now closer to that route than it should ever be. She watched the shark's path carefully. It stayed near the reef wall, not near her. It moved like a professional. No wasted movement, no sudden jerks. It wasn't hunting her, it was simply present, and that presence changed the rules. Layla surfaced quietly, careful not to splash. She reached the skiff, grabbed the gunnel, and pulled herself up, water streaming off her arms. Her co-worker, Danny, was still on shore. Layla could see him as a small figure near the equipment shed, likely setting out snorkel vests for the morning tour. She raised her hand and waved sharply, a signal that meant come out. Danny waved back lazily at first, then saw Layla's posture and stiffened. He jogged to the radio by the hut. Layla grabbed her own handheld radio from the skiff console and clicked it on. "Danny," she said, keeping her voice calm because calm kept everyone else calm. "The buoy line is drifting toward the cut. One anchor has moved." Danny's voice crackled back. "Copy. You okay?" Layla hesitated just a fraction, then chose honesty with control. "Also saw a shark at the reef gap," she said. "It turned inside and stayed near the reef edge. Not aggressive, but it's using the channel." There was a brief pause. "What kind?" Danny asked. "I didn't get a clean ID," Layla said. "Medium large, could be a reef shark. Doesn't matter, route is close to our line right now." Danny's voice tightened. "We'll keep swimmers back." "Yeah," Layla said. "No one in the water until I reset this line." Layla cut the engine on, because she didn't like being stationary for long. She idled the skiff to a position where she could work the anchor without being directly in the channel's pull. She tied a second rope to the buoy line and used the skiff's weight to help drag the anchor block back into position. Slow, controlled tension. She didn't jerk. She didn't fight the current like it was personal. She worked with angles, pulling the block sideways out of its trench, then back toward deeper sand away from the cut. It took time. Sweat ran down her temples despite being surrounded by water. Her hands burned from rope friction. The buoys bobbed, slowly shifting back toward their normal arc. But every few minutes, Layla's eyes went to the reef gap. The shark appeared twice more. Each time it came to the gap, then turned, like a commuter at a familiar intersection, choosing the inside edge and gliding along the reef, then disappearing into brighter lagoon water. It was not hunting her. It was not circling her. But it was there, and it was consistent. Consistency was what made Layla uneasy. Random animals were easy to write off. Patterned animals meant the environment had a routine that humans needed to respect. By the time Layla finished resetting the anchor, the buoy line looked correct again, pulled back a safe distance from the cut. The last buoy sat in lighter water, not in the channel's seam. The rope no longer strained like a tight muscle. She radioed Danny. "Buoy line reset," she said. "Keep the safe zone inside the line. No one near the cut today." Danny exhaled audibly through the radio. "We already told the guests," he said. "Some are whining." Layla almost smiled. "Let them whine," she said. "Whining is cheaper than stitches." She headed back to shore, and as the skiff bumped gently against the dock, she saw the first snorkel boat arriving from the north. Bright paint, loud music, tourists waving like the ocean was a theme park. Layla stepped onto the sand and walked straight to the tour leader, a cheerful man named Marco who always tried to charm safety rules into being optional. "Morning," Marco called. "Perfect day, yeah?" Layla didn't smile. "Buoy line drifted," she said. "Current is pulling hard at the cut, and there's a shark using the gap." Marco's grin faltered. "Like a little one?" Layla held his gaze. "Big enough," she said. "No water in the gap zone today. Keep them inside the line." Marco tried to argue with his hands. "Guests came for the reef. They want the real thing." Layla's voice stayed even. "The real thing includes currents and sharks," she said. "You can give them coral inside the safe zone, or you can give them a rescue scenario. Choose." Marco's hands dropped. He nodded reluctantly. "Okay," he muttered. All morning, Layla stayed near the beach with binoculars and a rescue board. She watched swimmers and watched the buoy line. She watched the cut like it was a mouth. The shark appeared once more around late morning, a shadow beyond the last buoy. It glided near the reef edge, approached the gap, and turned again. Each time it turned, Layla felt the same chill. The animal was not lost. It was not wandering. It was using the reef gap as a pivot point, and it was probably following prey movements that humans didn't notice. Small schools of fish moving in the current seam, bait being pushed by tide, and then, just before noon, the buoys drifted wrong again. Not as much as before, but enough that Layla saw it from shore. The last buoy pulled a little too close to the channel, the arc tightening. Her stomach sank. Either the anchor hadn't seated properly, or the current had increased again with tide shift. Layla grabbed her radio. "Danny," she said, "line is moving again." Danny's voice came back tense. "Tide's changing," he said. "It's ripping out there." Layla watched the water at the cut. The surface wrinkled harder now. Foam streaks shot through like white arrows. And then she saw the shark again, this time closer to the buoy line, still calm, still not interested in humans, but undeniably in the same corridor where the line was drifting. Layla didn't hesitate. She made the call people hated, but respected later. "Everyone out," she radioed to Marco. "Now." Marco protested through the radio, but Layla cut him off. "Out," she repeated. "This isn't negotiable." Danny began blowing a whistle from shore, long blasts that signaled swimmers to return. Guests grumbled, splashed, complained. A few laughed as if it was entertainment. Then a child screamed, more surprise than fear, when something brushed his leg near a buoy. It was only a fish, but in that moment everyone remembered that the ocean was not a pool. They came in faster. Layla watched until every head was counted on the sand. Only then did she exhale. The buoys continued to pull. The line tightened. The last buoy dipped and bobbed in the current seam like it was being tugged by an invisible hand. Layla stared at it and understood the larger problem. Their buoy system was too simple for a day like this. It relied on anchors holding in, shifting sand. It relied on the current being predictable. It relied on human schedules more than tide schedules. And the shark, turning at the reef gap like it belonged, was a reminder that the sea had its own routes that didn't care about resort safety plans. That afternoon, Layla sat with the resort manager and explained, in blunt terms, what needed to change. Heavier anchors, better placement, a secondary line farther inside, a clear no-swim radius around the cut, regardless of how calm it looked. The manager winced at cost. Layla didn't soften. "You can pay for anchors," she said, "or you can pay for lawsuits and helicopters you don't have." The manager signed off on heavier blocks. 2 days later, a small work crew installed new anchors and adjusted the arc so the buoy line sat farther inside the lagoon and farther away from the reef gap's pull. They added a second marker line closer to shore for crowded days, making the safe area more obvious for people who didn't know how to read water. On the morning they finished, Layla took the skiff out again at dawn. The buoys sat clean and correct, bright orange against clear blue-green water. The current at the cut still ran strong, but the line didn't creep. Layla watched the reef gap anyway. The shark appeared once more, maybe the same one, maybe another of the same kind, and did the same thing. Approached the gap, then turned along the inside edge and vanished. Layla didn't feel triumph. She felt respect. You couldn't remove sharks from reefs. You couldn't remove currents from gaps. You could only stop pretending your bright plastic buoys could override the ocean's behavior. The ocean would always drift things wrong if you let it. And the shark would always turn where the reef told it to. Layla idled the skiff and looked back toward shore, where tiny figures already moved on the beach, eager to enter water they didn't understand. She felt the familiar weight of responsibility and the quiet satisfaction of doing her job before the day demanded heroics. No rescues today, she told herself. Not because the ocean was kind, because the boundaries were set where the ocean actually allowed them.